Hi there, it is Jo from Minerva and today we are here for a sew along, and today I'm going to make the Megan Nielsen Darling dress. The pattern has a dress and a blouse version, a couple of views, view A and B, some different waistlines and different waist finishes. You can also select your sleeve options so you can switch up the blouse or the dress. The pattern goes from a size 0 to 20, and that is a bust 32 all the way through to a bust 46. This pattern has a couple of views, so there is view A, which is a dress with a waist and a gathered waistline, so you'll get a little bit of fullness in the waist. You can also try this as a dress that's loose fitting, but you can add a tie if you want, or you can wear it loose. That's view B, and that also is the pattern pieces for the blouse. Today I'm going to make view A with the cut waistline, and I'm going to make it short sleeved, but you can switch the sleeves around. You can make the 3/4 sleeve here if you wish. This is for woven fabric, so not a stretch pattern, so you'll be looking for something quite light so that you can get those gathers, something like a cotton lawn or a Minerva exclusive cotton sateen, or if you want a really draping flowing version then you can use our viscose challis. Today I'm using Bubble Lights. It's my favourite Minerva exclusive print. It's by Rachel Parker and the print size is quite small, and because of all of the palette of colours in the background there's not any pattern matching really required. You might want to make sure that you haven't got two large yellow pieces next to each other or two darker blue pieces next to each other, but a pattern balance will be fine. If you're using viscose challis, then you'll need to pre-wash this fabric. It has a viscose content, which is made from a kind of wood fibre, so it will have an element of shrinkage. So do that before you cut out your pieces so that you can make sure that the dress that you make or the blouse that you make will fit you at the end as expected. This pattern is for an intermediate or a beginner sewer who's got a few garments under their belt and want to branch out into some extra skills like gathering, buttonholes, and making a facing around a neckline. If you can make this, then you're really close to putting a collar on a dress. So this dress is a sort of preemptive pattern for before you can put a collar on. But actually, once you've realised that you can work around a curve, then putting a collar on becomes easy. I'm making a sample piece today, so I've cut out a size 18. I won't be able to model that, but I will show it you on the mannequin at the end, and you can take a look at some of the details like the ties, how the neck's finished, close up, and the hem as well. Okay, you need to cut out your fabric. There's nothing unusual there. Everything is cut on the straight grain. There's one piece you need to pay particular attention to, and that is the piece for the neck binding, because you need to cut that on the bias. If you're struggling with that, you can buy a ready made bias binding. A little bit about your machine setup. So I use my sewing machine. I'm not going to be using an overlocker very much. I might just finish the edges because I'm flopping my material around a lot and moving those raw edges around, but you can use a zigzag or an overcast foot, or if you want to finish your edges on an overlocker, that is fine too. You will need a sharps needle. I found these handy little hooks in a DIY store with a little bit of sticky foam on the back, and I've stuck one to the side of my sewing machine, and it has been brilliant lately because every time I change my needle I hook on which needle is in the machine, so I know I've got a sharps one in there because I last sewed with a sharps needle. You'll know you need a sharps needle because you might get in viscose challis little runs or shots in the fabric. If you're getting anything like that, that is the time to change your needle, whether you're using a universal one, a sharps one, a fine needle, whatever needle is working in your machine. As soon as you start to get shots or runs, it's time to change. The first part of the pattern is to work on the darts and putting together the upper body. Here are the two front pieces. They have darts at the bottom coming up from the waist here. And I've also put a little bit of interfacing there ready for my buttonholes later on, so you can put that in. You can stay stitch the neckline, or I've used a little bit of form band tape. It's a really useful product. It's a little strip of ready cut interfacing, and it has a line of stitching within that interfacing, and you just press it on There's the line of stitching there, look. And it doesn't stretch, and it keeps the neckline from stretching out. I've done one dart, and I've also done my pressing. So I've pressed in the seam allowance on the facing, and then I can fold it in on the fold line so that it matches up with the neckline. I'm going to put the darts in. If you need more dart information, you can check that out in my dart video. Just make sure they're accurately lined up, and then sew them in place. Start at the wide end and sew to the narrow end. Give those a good press and tie off the ends, and your darts are done. There they are. This is the two front pieces. All the prep for those is complete. Take your back piece and put it right sides together. I've also got a little bit of form band around that back neckline as well. We're not going to sew the shoulder seams, we're going to leave those, but we're going to sew up the side seams. The seam allowance on this pattern is 1.5 throughout. You can finish your edges with an overlocker or you can zigzag them. That's as much as we're going to do on the top at the moment. Make sure you are following the instructions for the view that you are doing. So I'm going to continue with view A, where we put the pockets in the skirt. The skirt pieces come as a back piece, and that's cut on the fold, and two front pieces which are split because we've got buttons down the front, and you'll be looking for that little notch there. That's your pocket placement notch, so you need to mark that through onto your fabric in some way, chalk or a little snip. And then you're going to take your pocket pieces and put them right sides together onto your skirt piece. So that's the little notch there, and the pocket lines up with that notch. You're going to stitch that and understitch it. If you don't know how to understitch, you can check that out on Minerva. Press those out with the pocket going away from the skirt, and then put the front pieces right sides together, and the first place to match up is the top and the bottom of the pocket. Don't worry too much about the pocket bags. They will come together if you get that top and bottom part of the pocket lined up, and then you can pin the rest of the pocket in place. You're going to then pin up down to the hem and sew from the top around the pocket and down the side, but not this bit here because you need to get your hand in there. When you sew, pivot to that little corner where the pocket meets the skirt. When you get to the seam line of your pocket, lift up the foot, pivot and continue down the side of your skirt. Just make sure nothing's shifted around or moved while you did that turn. So that the pocket bags hang really nicely and don't make a pucker on the right side of your fabric, you just need to snip into where that pivot point is at the bottom and the top of your pocket. When you flap your pocket back, everything will lie flat and you can give it a good press. The next part of this skirt construction is to put the gathers along the top of the skirt. I'm going to put one row in first and then put my second row underneath that. I like to sew in between the gathers when I attach the skirt. You don't put gathers at the end because that is your facing part there, so you leave that flat. And you've got all your gathers here, and you might not know the distances yet, but we can put some pins in place. Now you're going to need to make a little bit of space because you're going to put your skirt piece out all gathered ready and your bodice piece right sides together to put the upper and lower parts of the dress into one. So with the right side of the top against the right side of the skirt, just open out your pressed facings so that they all line up with the notches. There's 3 notches there, the little seam allowance fold in, the band and where it will meet. And then you can start to put in some key points. So I'm going to do the side seam, and then that will show me how much more I've got to gather in. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. Once it's all together and pinned, you can then take it to the sewing machine and sew. I like to make my stitch line in between those gathers. It's a really sweet spot there. They're gathered up really, really nicely. And then I take out the lower gathering stitch. If some of your gathers are a little bit out of place, you can just adjust those with a pair of tweezers. And here's that lower bit of gathering. You can just see it on the dress, so you need to pull that out. Here as well, I'll just pull it through, get rid of all of that. But it does allow us to have a really good even gather. I've just overlocked the edge of there because I'm handling my fabric a lot, and you can see now why we didn't join these shoulder seams together, because it would have made that job a little trickier. Now that we have got that skirt in place, we can put the shoulder seams together. So line those up, a few pins, and sew across your shoulder seams. I've just zigzagged those just to finish them off, and we can move on to the next part. And because we're moving to the sleeves, we need to make sure that our shoulder seams are pressed flat. I'm making the short sleeves, but you might be making the 3/4 sleeve or the gathered 3/4 sleeve, so you'll have your pieces cut out for that. I found that hemming the sleeves while they're off the dress is easy because they're light, the whole of the dress isn't sort of slopping off the machine. I can really keep control of those sleeve hems. Here are the sleeve pieces. It's number 6, and you need to make sure that before you take your pattern pieces off that you've made all your notch markings, which will make it easier to insert your sleeve. Sew up the side seams. We're going to put these sleeves in a round, not flat, and do the same with the other sleeve. I've hemmed mine, as I mentioned, because they're really nice and light and easy to handle. Make sure your fabrics are right sides together and you've got the right sleeve in the right hole using the notches. Start under the arm and continue to pin. I've got a video on setting in sleeves if you need some help. Here's my sleeve finished. You can finish the edges too to stop them fraying. We are on to the trickiest part of the pattern now, which is to make sure that we get all of those facings all lying in the right direction, because that will mean it is easier to put the neck binding on. So you've pre-pressed your facing, and you're going to fold it back with right sides together so that that slanted edge meets. You're going to pin in place, but keep your seam allowance folded down so you don't unfold that. Put a couple of pins in to keep it all nice and flat, because it's going to be sandwiched between the binding. There's the seam allowance. We're going to put those 3 binding pieces together. If you've used ready-made binding, then you will have one continuous strip. You need to make sure that you've got a little bit of fabric left over at the end of each bodice piece, so you've got plenty of manoeuvrability and you're not cutting yourself a little bit short there. You want to have a nice finish on the inside. The binding pieces are cut on the bias, so they're a little bit stretchy, so handle with care. And you're going to join them with a right angle. So I'm going to mark that on so I can be accurate, as well as pin. So I've got myself a guide for stitching. Same on the other end. So I get one continuous piece. Here's my binding. I have pressed it all and it's ready to go on my top. The edges are folded into the centre. I used a bias binding tape maker just to help me guide this slippery fabric into the shape that I wanted so that I could iron it really carefully. Make sure you press, don't drag too much or you'll pull it out of shape. Right, let's take a look at this binding. So with right sides together, you're going to pin the binding to the raw edge of the neckline, adding some pins. I'm finding that putting them in vertically is really helpful. I can get around the curve easily. And then the rest of that binding is going to go around the neckline until it comes out back on the other side. Once you've done that, you can understitch it really close to the edge, and that helps it to lie flat. There's that little reminder there again if you need some help. And then you can fold the binding to the wrong side and pin it all the way around the neck. You've got to be careful around the curve of the back neck. Don't get little pulls and creases around there. Now's the time to put in a label if you want to do that too. I'm top stitching the last part of all of the neck and the front facings down. I find that actually I wanted to go from the waist around the neck and back to the waist in one top stitch sew line, and then I sewed the lower facings from the bottom to the waist and joined in those seam lines. It was easier just to keep control of the neck binding. I wanted to make sure that that was lying really flat, and it was easier for me to do it in 2 parts. It may be for you too. So I'm just going to pin down the lower facings and prepare all of that. You might have some interfacing in there as well, especially if you're using Visco challis. It will help when you make your buttonholes later. I'm going to join my lower stitch line to that upper stitch line. And you can see I sewed around that top area first so that I could make sure that none of that got twisted and the understitching lay really flat. That's what it should look like there on the apex. My top stitching line is quite gentle. You can put a bit more of a point on there if you want to. and then you're ready to look at the next part of the pattern. If you would like to add a tie detail, now is the time to do that. I did think when I'd sewn the sides together, oh, I've forgotten to put the ties in, but the ties don't go in the side seam, they go in a little bit at the back, so it really is just a little tie that nips in the centre back. I'm going to put these together and we'll show you the placement for those. You can of course leave them out, you don't have to have ties. If you like a free and easy summer swishy dress, that's fine too. I'm going to put the ties in just to show you where they are placed. It's a full wraparound belt if you're making view C, so if you've got the dress without the gathers, then you'll be making one continuous belt out of those tie pieces so that it ties around at the front. This is number 7, which is the tie piece. There are 2 of those, and we're going to try and achieve this with a folded end and a raw edge for sewing to the dress. So take your tie and fold the long edges together, pin in place and sew. You can clip off the corners so that you don't have too much bulk inside, and that will help you to get a nice finish. I love using my tube turners, and that's what I'm going to use to turn out the belt. So you put the tube inside the tie all the way to the end. Then I use the stubby end of the stick to push the fabric through so it doesn't damage the fabric. It slides really easily, and then I can use the pointed end of the stick to push out the corners carefully. Super easy, and then I can press it. You might need to refer back to the back pattern piece to find your pattern placement marking for the belt. So I'm just marking it on with a little bit of chalk. I do need to be accurate, so make sure I've got that side seam because I want the belt to be equidistant from each side seam. And I have pressed up the raw edge end of the belt, and I'm going to place it on those markings. I've just used a little bit of hemming web to help me, so I'm just going to get my ironing board because I'm going to apply a bit of heat to the ends of the ties so that I can sort of glue them in place so they don't slip and move around while I'm sewing under the machine. This is hemming web, Wonder Web. It's a permanent sticky interfacing, so I'm going to put a little bit on the dress, put my tie in position with the raw edge down. I've put a little bit of web under there as well, and then when I apply some heat it will just stick it in place. Nice little tip if you want to make sure that you're not spoiling your finishing touches at the end. Just going to put it pin in to be sure, and do the same on the other end. To attach the ties, you're going to sew a square and then put a cross through the centre. It's quite a tricky manoeuvre on the sewing machine, so take your time. It should look like this when you've finished. And the raw edge will be enclosed underneath. We've got all of that neckband on now and all of the front facing, so now we just need to put our buttonholes and buttons in place, and that will finish off our dress. I'm using a button measuring tool. It's really useful. I've lost some of the button markings from my pattern, so I'm just going to space them out using my tool. I've put pins in to show where I've decided to have my buttons. You can use a chalk if you want to. You can use tailor's tacks. There's lots of different ways that you can use buttonholes. There's a tutorial for buttonholes here depending on whether you have an automatic buttonholer or a 4-step buttonholer. Essentially, you're going to put your button into the buttonhole foot at the back, take your normal foot off, put your buttonholer foot in, and you must remember to pull down the little sensor at the side. Choose your buttonhole selection. If you're doing a 4-step buttonhole, you're going to have to choose for each part of the buttonhole. Mine's automatic, so I can just whiz through my 9 buttonholes. Just make sure that you're lining up either side of the button band. You can split your buttonholes with a seam ripper or a buttonhole tool. Go from the edge to the centre so that you don't split through the end of your buttonhole, and you can tie off your threads. That's one done, 8 more to go. It's time to put the buttons on, and I like to start with the one on the waistline because that's a bit of a datum point then, because at least I know I'm going to get that waist seam running really nice and smooth, and then I can put the buttons on the top from that waist seam, and then I can do the ones below. But that one there means I'm definitely getting the waist seam correct. You can choose your hem technique here. So if you want to take the hem allowance from the pattern, that you can use a hot hemmer or a seam gauge to press up the hem. With viscose challis, pressing the hem before you sew it is really important because it stops it being too bouncy and it doesn't move around too much. If you want some tips on other ways that you can hem, you can check out some of my videos. I have one on using your blind hemming foot, so you can just get little nicks of fabric along the hemline. There's lots of different ways there, so you could check that out if you want to switch up your hem technique. Now it's time to try on your dress. I hope you've enjoyed today's sew along. This is the darling dress I've made view A with a short sleeve. All the products that I've used are listed below here, or you can check them out over on our Minerva feed. We would love to see if you've been making anything with our viscose challis, if you've made this pattern, or whatever project you've got on the go. Do make a free account with us, share your makes and inspire this sewing community. You can also join our craft club where you will receive offers and discounts throughout the year. Thank you very much for watching. Do come back for more sew-alongs, learn to sew tutorials, pattern pairings, new fabric releases. All of that inspiration is here at Minerva. See you soon.